There's a fine line between locals keeping their communities safe and vigilantism. When residents don't believe the police are up to the job, it's up to them to dish out justice themselves. Is it up to them to dish out justice themselves? How common a practice is communities taking justice into their own hands in South Africa? Dr. Guy Lamb is a criminologist and has some answers for us this morning. Well, we hope he does. Dr. Lamb, thank you so much for your time. Vigilante justice is nothing new, but it seems like it's on the up. Is that a fair assessment?
It's difficult to say if it's on the up. It's certainly been with us for decades. It predates certainly 1994. Vigilante justice was fairly rife within many areas because the police were just repressing people, but also vigilante justice related to those who were allegedly forming on cadres and liberation struggle supporters and those who were involved in kind of trying to fight back against the police. But certainly since the mid-1990s, we've seen fairly elevated levels of vigilante justice. We need to also remember, if we look at Khayelitsha and the Khayelitsha Commission of Inquiry that came about, sort of about 5-6 years ago, that was ultimately brought about because of vigilante violence that we saw within Khayelitsha. So we've seen a number of recent cases within the media where you see community groups or individuals coming together who perpetrating violence against alleged criminals. So it's nothing new, unfortunately, and it usually is an indication where there's a breakdown in communication and relationships between communities and police, or you're seeing groups who are getting frustrated with the slow pace of the criminal justice system.
What did we learn from the Khayelitsha Commission, and has anything positive been instituted since then?
Well, with the Khayelitsha Commission, we did see some very positive things happening. I mean, one of the findings of it was that there is an unequal distribution of police resources, and it really sort of demonstrated that poorer, more high-crime areas are not getting the police resources that they should be getting. So it's wealthier areas are disproportionately getting more police resources than poorer areas. And there was a recommendation from there that this needs to be seriously addressed. So there's been a conversation ongoing about that, but it hasn't been resolved yet. And certainly we're even seeing it at the provincial level, where your previous stories relating to what's happening within the Western Cape. There were some very interesting things that happened around where the provincial government started to engage a lot more proactively with communities, trying to do joint problem solving. You saw, national police supporting it informally, and you saw the sort of cluster commanders playing very prominent roles. So there's some very positive things that developed after that, but it wasn't sustained, and that's the problem. I think one of these things that really looking forward is the police need to be focusing a lot more on working with communities, taking what communities say seriously, and joint problem solving with them. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen to a great extent within South Africa.
That lack of resources you just spoke about, Dr. Lamb, in poorer communities has led to those communities policing their own neighborhoods. And it's something that they have to do and maybe should be applauded because, they're taking initiative. But how do you sort of balance it to make sure it doesn't turn into instances where there's vigilante justice and there are people who are being killed without any sort of trial or fair process?
Well, I mean, in most cases, you get communities that are proactive and have, we get places where the police and communities work together through the community policing forums or through neighborhood watches. I mean, we have probably the best systems actually in the Western Cape, where you've got an accreditation process that's in place where the city and the province, will accredit neighborhood watch, community safety organizations, provide them with some resources and kind of, give them a better understanding of the law. It's really where you've got areas where this relationship is not good, where communities tend to take the law into their own hands. They tend to get frustrated. Often they kind of see criminals who they've reported to the police and they still see them walking around in their communities, and they want to they get frustrated and they want these individuals to be punished. And that's where you see it breaking down. But in many cases, you see community groups playing a very positive role and working very closely with the police. But it only works where you've got at the station level and the cluster level, where those police commanders are willing to engage with the community, take their concerns seriously, and try and find solutions in a fairly short space of time to those problems.
What can be done in those communities where the police aren't taking the community initiative seriously?
Well, I mean, for example, within the Western Cape, we have the police ombudsman. So that's somewhere where communities can go to and raise their concerns and their complaints, and the ombudsman will investigate and make recommendations. The problem for many communities is even if they raise concerns with the sort of at the specific station level or at the cluster level, and they don't get a response, then they don't really have much course of action. And then you often see them, kind of just saying, well, we're going to ignore the police and, deal with matters ourselves. So, unfortunately, there aren't many recourses for them to pursue. It ultimately comes down to whether the police are willing to cooperate with them and support them.
Dr. Lam, I want to switch focus very quickly, and I understand if you can't answer this because maybe we hadn't planned to ask you, but this is something that just unfolded last night, a hostage situation where we had members of cabinet held hostage. It's a surreal situation. Who looks after those ministers? How did this happen? What kind of training do their VIP protection receive where they allow this to happen?
Well, I mean, this is a different scenario. For example, ministers do have VIP protection. I mean, these kind of situations, it was a scheduled meeting it was supposed to be at the presidential level, but essentially cabinet ministers were involved to discuss with a certain grouping of military veterans, ex-combatants, who feel they're entitled to certain benefits and have been protesting and expressing their frustration about it. So it was one of these situations where the meeting got out of hand. The military veterans and ex-combatants then kind of locked them into the venue. In a hostage situation unfolded. In those kind of circumstances, I think certainly they weren't seen as a major threat, and hence, they weren't necessarily taking the certain action because it was a meeting to discuss problems and trying to figure a way out. And I understand from the reports that have been made about it is that a resolution couldn't be reached, and there was a request to take the meeting, to continue the meeting at a future date. And certainly those military veterans didn't appreciate that and wanted their issues resolved. Because there's been a frustration. This has been going on for decades, where military veterans, certain categories of military veterans haven't been able to access benefits while others haven't. So it's just something that's been brewing, and certainly it's become a lot more acute in recent weeks.
Well, Dr. Lam, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Criminologist Dr. Guy Lam talking about how communities can help police their areas and stay within the bounds of the law.